On April 15th of 2010, Microsoft pulled the plug on Xbox Live 1.0, rendering hundreds of original Xbox multiplayer games permanently offline. Over the ensuing 12 years, a small yet strong community of enthusiasts have kept the online side of Microsoft's console alive, through services like Xlink Kai. But despite how useful and important that service is, it wasn't a complete solution. Many games have netcode issues in System Link mode, since they were designed to be played on local networks, not across oceans. Those that do work acceptably still often leave players with suboptimal experiences, or even outright unable to connect. And this is to say nothing of Xbox Live-enabled games that don't support the System Link feature, such as the entire EA Games catalog, for which network multiplayer of any kind has been unplayable for over a decade. There's also the matter of leaderboards, the friends list, voice chat, matchmaking, and unique gamer tags, all of which were lost when Microsoft flipped the switch. But after what felt like an eternity of nostalgic yearning, the original Xbox is finally entering a new chapter, because on November 15th, 2022, the 21st birthday of the original Xbox, Xbox Live 1.0 returned. You're looking at Insignia, a reverse-engineered, full-scale replacement for Xbox Live, and full-scale is not an exaggeration. Every one of those long-lost features I mentioned is already functional in the first week of the closed beta. Yes, even the hilariously low-quality voice chat.
God damn it, I forgot
That fucking mic, I heard that.
What did he even say, dude? Insignia's launch has completely derailed my video plans. This was supposed to be a Tony Hawk video, but after years of waiting, I think I deserved the chance to witness the beginning of this Xbox renaissance. So after spending launch week playing nearly every game currently supported, I thought I'd take the time to show off what Insignia can do, and hopefully convince a few of y'all to dust off your Xboxes and partake. So, like I said, I'm going to share the highlights of my time with Insignia so far, and cap the video off by mentioning a couple games I'm excited to play when their time comes. But before we get knee-deep into this, there are a few things I should probably throw out there for the sake of clarity. First, Insignia is in beta. At time of writing, it's in its first week of beta. It is a work in progress, and while my experience has been remarkably smooth, there are issues. At time of writing, Insignia supports only a couple dozen games, with about a fifth of those titles only having leaderboards rather than multiplayer sessions. According to the team, these were chosen to give the service a varied launch lineup while keeping the workload manageable. You aren't getting heavy hitters like Halo 2 or Burnout 3 on launch day because those titles had more complex services behind the scenes that are going to require more time to get working. The current plan is to add more games to the service every month for as long as it's possible, with the end goal of supporting every Xbox Live-enabled game on the platform. The first batch of new games is already dropped, and while I can't say if these rapid releases are going to be a theme going forward, it seems that the developers are making impressive headway, and I'm hopeful that they'll be able to stick to that monthly game schedule at the very least. So let's talk about the launch week experience. When the registration tool was released a few weeks ago, I immediately got my console signed up and eagerly awaited a beta code, which arrived early in the morning on the 15th. After discovering my old soft mod blocked Xbox Live, I upgraded to a newer one by Rocky 5, and after inputting the Insignia DNS, boom, everything just worked. The service takes you through the original Xbox Live sign-up procedure, and allows you to pick a unique gamer tag, agree to the terms of service, and that's it, you're in. For most games, no further fuss is required. Over the course of launch week, I met dozens of people from the Insignia Discord and sampled the entire lineup save for Street Fighter, DDR, Unreal 2, and Battlefront 1. I don't have the time or desire to describe every game in depth, but I will run through the highlights. After completing the sign-up process, I popped in my disc copy of Midtown Madness 3 and found myself in a lobby almost immediately. For those unfamiliar with the series, Midtown Madness was a precursor to the Midnight Club series. The first two games were developed by Angel Studios, who would go on to become Rockstar San Diego and make that better-known series, but Midtown Madness 3 was instead handled by Battlefield developers DICE. And while not quite as well-refined or stylistically rich as Midnight Club, their take on this formula is an excellent arcade racer, though perhaps racer is the wrong word, at least in the case of its multiplayer, which is far more oriented towards party games like Tag and Keep Away.
Weed!
Now, I have played Midtown Madness 3 over Kai before, but this is the first time I've gotten to play with a full lobby. I've really missed party modes like these, so getting to experience it again as originally intended is refreshing. The action is so frantic and unpredictable, and it's exactly what I love about this era of gaming. It didn't need to be competitive or balanced, it just needed to be fun. But that isn't to say that competition didn't have a place on the Xbox. Quite the opposite, actually. It's where competitive gaming on consoles really got its start. But I can think of few games more synonymous with the early 2000s competitive gaming than Counter-Strike. Admittedly, this probably isn't what comes to mind when you think of Counter-Strike nowadays, but it's also a far more successful and important title than most remember. For many, Counter-Strike for Xbox was their first experience with the franchise. Maybe their only experience. This version sold millions of copies, and in a pre-Halo 2 Xbox Live, it was considered one of the service's killer apps. It's hard to think of a more quintessential shooter than Counter-Strike, and this is certainly a respectable adaptation. There is a popular misconception that this is a straight port of CS 1.6, but that's not the case. It's an original game with bespoke assets, many of which would be repurposed for Condition Zero the following year. There really wasn't much in the way of content exclusive to this version, though. There were only 2 maps that never officially left the Xbox. Miami was a bank robbery scenario with a hostage objective, while Fast Line is set in a Japanese subway station. Neither of these maps are particularly great. Despite my love for Fast Line's aesthetics, it's quite terrible to actually play. Miami is better, but only just. Playing Counter-Strike on a controller might sound like a nightmare, and that would usually be the case, but the Xbox version actually handles extremely well, if a bit differently from the traditional experience. Aiming is not quite on the level of Halo's precision, but it's close. Recoil and hitboxes are tweaked enough for control sticks that gun duels never feel as if you're fighting just to center the screen, while still maintaining the depth of source material spray patterns and unique weapon rolls. Pretty much every automatic in the game feels excellent, and these are easily the best grenades out of any old source game, not that the bar was set that high. Only one category of weapons suffers from the transition to controller. On PC, the op essentially turns Counter-Strike into a high-stakes point-and-click adventure, but that kind of precision is much more difficult to achieve on an analog stick. I'm sure that with enough practice, players could reliably snipe with this input method, but it's certainly less than ideal. Still though, the 10 or so hours of Counter-Strike I played on Insignia were wholly enjoyable and even tightly competitive at points. This is one of those titles that has netcode issues on Kai, so being able to casually pick it up and experience the game as if it were 2003 again has been a real treat. But the Xbox being the Xbox, this is far from the only shooter on offer. Unreal Championship is basically a console port of Unreal Tournament 2003, and a very good one at that, with the added bonus of being easier to play in vanilla form than that game's sea of mods. It doesn't have the slick, refined controls of Counter-Strike, but it doesn't really need them. For most weapons, Unreal is less about pinpoint precision and more about movement, leading your shots, and item control. And once you've wrapped your head around the bindings and how to cycle through the guns, Unreal Championship is as chaotic and visceral as you'd hope. On the opposite end of the spectrum, support for the original Ghost Recon was added as part of the first Insignia update. I absolutely adore this game, but I never really got to play it in multiplayer since it's such an aged, relatively niche title. So finally getting to play the competitive mode felt like taking something off my bucket list. The maps are far smaller and less tactical than I expected. Ghost Recon's multiplayer better resembles a Call of Duty type beat than something attached to the vast, dense level design of the single-player campaign, though if more grounded action is what you're after, the single-player missions can be played in co-op, along with alternate co-op rule sets with varying difficulty options. It's a pretty great time. That being said, the shooters we've discussed so far have primarily been ports of successful PC franchises, with mixed degrees of compromise. While this next title may be multi-platform, it's still a bit different in that it was a console game from the start, and one that I've not played. So with no point of comparison, I got to experience something completely new. 13's multiplayer can be succinctly pitched as cel-shaded GoldenEye, with maps that often remind me of Team Fortress 2 in aesthetics and design. It's a refreshingly simple shooter, designed around weapon pickups and basic objectives. I would love to play more of this game, but it's a rare specimen that actually works better in System Link through LAN tunneling than it does when played on Xbox Live. For some reason, the developers saw fit to impose a lower tick rate for Xbox Live users than for LAN. This line of thinking was likely chosen to minimize bandwidth requirements, since many internet connections of the day were constrictive. But not allowing users with better connections to run higher quality lobbies is a puzzling decision. Netcode is visibly shaky when just walking around, much less in combat, where players have to lead their shots. Or rather, players with the exception of the host, who has the largest host advantage I've ever noticed in any video game. It's a shame, too, because the game was fun in spite of this, but given the international nature of Insignia's community, I suspect it won't be a popular favorite on the service. For clarity, though, that's not Insignia's fault. The game was made poorly. It's better in System Link, but only marginally, and it's likely that matches on Xbox Live will also suffer from this issue back in the day. But it's an important example of how this service functions. At least in its current form, it's still bound by the limitations of the Xbox and how developers made its games. and that means some titles aren't going to be as flawlessly playable as we might remember. And I think that's as good a segue as any for the next game I'd like to mention. Out of every game currently supported on Insignia, Star Wars Battlefront 2 has definitely generated the most hype. It's a universally recognized classic, a type of game that seemingly everyone has fond memories of. Nearly 20 years later, the game still spawns memes, and while I won't pretend I think it's timeless or even that it's aged particularly well, I have to admit that it's still a blast most times I boot it up. I've organized sessions on both PC and PlayStation 2 in the last couple of years, so this was not my first time experiencing the online multiplayer, but it was my first time playing the game on Xbox Live. And to be blunt, this game makes me worry about Insignia's potential to grow a more casual audience. Because Xbox Live is a closed ecosystem, and one that no longer actually exists for that matter, the official automatic method of installing updates and DLC is long gone. Insignia can't provide this content, even if it was originally available for free, because it's still copyrighted material, and the team is understandably steering clear from any and all risks that might draw the ire of legal teams with the power to shut the project down. Obtaining and installing the content on your own is insanely easy, but because Insignia can technically be used on unmodified systems, many of its users don't have the means to install these updates even if someone does tell them how. But while Insignia can run on stock systems, the setup process still involves running a homebrew app, and that uses the exact same materials and methods as actually soft modding the damn thing. People should be modding their systems, but the stubborn are refusing to do so and thus making it harder for people to play together. Let me once again preface this by saying it's in no way a criticism of Insignia, the way it was designed, or the people who develop it. They're literally doing this for free as a hobby on top of their studies and careers. I'm simply pointing out an unfortunate issue with certain games that doesn't seem to have a clear fix, with Battlefront 2 being the most severe example I've encountered thus far. Games like Tetris Worlds and Counter-Strike have issues with this, but they can generally be worked around in some way. Battlefront 2 can't. Or at least if it can, it's significantly more difficult. The Platinum Hits version of the game came with the title updates on disk, meaning it's incompatible with Black Label copies of the game unless those users also install the patch. And even then, players using bad rips are having issues with their installations, essentially causing the game to identify itself as a different version from the others, barring them from joining each other. Long story short, this is fragmenting the community. Unmodded users with Black Label copies of the game can't play with those who own Platinum Hits discs, and while it's possible to verify the integrity of a game rip, many aren't going to bother. I want to be clear this is very much a workable problem for those that are willing to do so, but the unfortunate reality of this kind of service is that many will see it as a novelty, only engaging with it if it's convenient and simple. The dev team have made the process of getting online as simple as it possibly can be, but their hands are kind of tied here. Insignia is always going to be a niche service no matter what, but it has the potential to grow an audience much larger and more active than other original Xbox communities. So I hope that some sort of solution to title update musical shares can be figured out. Anyways, once you manage to get into a game, Battlefront 2 works great, and I did still enjoy playing it, but it isn't the Star Wars title I was most excited to try out. Jedi Academy is a hybrid first-person shooter and third-person lightsaber combat game, and I won't beat around the bush, this game provided the most fun I've had in Insignia thus far. I rented Jedi Academy as a kid, but the only thing I remember about it is how the lightsaber would leave a trail of scorched metal on any wall it contacted. The shooting I can take or leave, but the lightsaber combat here is so much fun. Duels last a decent amount of time, and force powers can make or break any given fight. Get the fuck no! I love how much control you're given over your lightsaber, fighting style, and force abilities. There's far more depth to the combat in Jedi Academy than any other Star Wars game I can think of, and while I'm far from a franchise superfan, it's hard not to get immersed in action this good. Friends in my Discord call can attest that I was getting really into these matches.
Kacey, you having fun?
Yes. Oh god, I'm no longer having fun. I have 2 HP. I have 2 HP and Shrek is charging me. I only got to play a little of this one, due to most Insignia users focusing on other titles, but even having played only one mode on one map a handful of times, I fell in love with Jedi Academy and I can't wait to play more of it. And that last bit of sentiment is perhaps the thing about Insignia that incites me the most. The ability to try games online for the first time and find something new. I missed the chance to play these games online back in the day, and even if I had been on Xbox Live at the time, I wouldn't have gotten to experience everything like I will now. So with that in mind, I want to highlight a few games that are not yet compatible with Insignia that I'm personally looking forward to playing. Obviously, the entire EA library is a big deal since they aren't playable any other way. Burnout 3 and Need for Speed Underground 2 are the obvious choices, but I'm also excited to experience the EA Sports big games and the later NASCAR iterations. Beyond EA, we have Star Wars Republic Commando, which doesn't play well on land tunneling. Being the only original Xbox game I got to play on live back in the day, this is definitely on my shortlist, especially since the remaster left the multiplayer out completely. Time Splitters Future Perfect is a split-screen classic that I'd love to experience with my internet friends, and the same goes for Tron 2.0 Killer App, and a whole slew of undeniably less than stellar shooters that I feel are probably still pretty fun in the multiplayer context. Racing games being my bread and butter, most of the games I'm itching to play are in that category. Midnight Club 2 and 3 are obvious picks, being among the best street racing games ever made, but the original Xbox library was absolutely packed with racing bangers. Auto Modelista, Sega GT Online, Crash and Burn, MotoGP 3, and the original Forza all come to mind. And there are some nostalgic guilty pleasures in there too. Street Racing Syndicate is pretty mid, but pretty much any game that looks and sounds like the Fast and the Furious is something I'm down to relive. So while Insignia's launch lineup is understandably small, the gradual trickle of new titles means that every game, no matter how obscure or forgotten, will get at least some chance to shine. I think that's the best potential of Insignia as a service, an opportunity to foster a community around games that haven't had communities in over a decade. Insignia is undeniably one of the most important projects in multiplayer game preservation, and if it can continue to grow its user base and support new games, it's on track to tick every box I could reasonably hope for.